Teddy, are you going to say hello? Can you say hello?
Hi, Teddy.
Thank you very much. And so, hello and welcome to Pet Talk with me, Anna, and what's your name? That's Teddy. It's Teddy, and we need to be able to see his face there. That's Teddy. So from the two of us, welcome to our beautiful guest today, who is Andrew Hale. And I do consider you to be a very beautiful soul because I watch avidly all your discussions on your YouTube channel. And I am so grateful to you for everything that you do to help people understand animals and particularly dogs better. So first off, I just want to say that.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. It's nice to see you both again.
Well, I was watching one of your, I think this one was not a discussion. I think this was one that you did as a presentation to camera. And you were talking about appropriate and inappropriate behavior and as concepts. And of course, as a therapist myself, all sorts of bells began to ring, and I thought, what a great subject to discuss. So it might be good to start with the idea that perhaps we need to rethink thinking about these terms, appropriate and inappropriate.
Sure, I think for me, we need to start with recognizing that we're all indoctrinated heavily into the principle of the good-bad continuum. This notion that somehow behavior is on a spectrum of good through neutral to bad, where we can then think about, appropriate, inappropriate, right, wrong, good, bad, all these kinds of things. And underpinning that, therefore, is a notion that we should seek to reward the appropriate, the good, and punish or ignore, depending on what your view is, the bad or the inappropriate. And I think when we look at that, then it seems pretty right, doesn't it? This is the point. That seems right. We want more of the good. Great. We want less of the bad. Yeah. We want the appropriate stuff. Yeah. We don't want the inappropriate stuff. It sounds right. And the fact that it sounds so right shows how heavily indoctrinated we are into that principle. We think about good children, bad children. We think about good dog, bad dog. We think about appropriate behavior, inappropriate behavior. But for me, if we just step back a little bit and just ask a few simple questions, we start to unravel. It starts to unravel. The first question is the big one. Who's deciding what's good or bad? Who's deciding what's appropriate and inappropriate? And what narrative is that based on for that individual? First question. And that's an important one. Come on to all these things in a second. Second thing for me is how arbitrary in nature is that judgment based? So I don't, I get all the things you're telling me, but regardless of all that, that's still bad. That's still inappropriate. That's a very arbitrary view, regardless of how you're experiencing, how you're struggling. For example, I'm still going to make a definition. I'm still going to make a judgment on it. And thirdly, and this is another big one for me, the behavior that another has deemed to be inappropriate, what intrinsic value, communicatively, relief seeking, safety seeking, whatever it is, did that behavior have to that individual? What needs did it represent? What need was it trying to communicate? And secondly, the behavior with which we, the other, me, if I'm the one doing the judging, if I'm thinking, right, Anna, that behavior is inappropriate, I'm going to get you to do something else that I find appropriate. What value intrinsically now does that new behavior have for the individual? Now, these are important questions. So I like to look back in the human way and then bring it around to doggies. the one that we can really think about here is the notion of children should be seen and not heard. Children, big part of society where this notion of appropriate, inappropriate was used. How many children were deemed to be naughty, bad, disruptive? Were just struggling to communicate need to feel safe, need for connection, for sure. We know there's a lot of focus at the moment on secure attachments and the importance of them. And part of the thing about for a young developing brain is about, regardless of their dysregulatory state, that their primary caregiver is always their return to safety. And if they're not, then that's a problem developmentally. How we grow and how we perceive self are important. So the need for connection, the need for relief. If you feel physical pain, emotional pain, social pain, you need relief. And that's what you could be trying to communicate. But somebody else has decided it's bad, naughty, inappropriate. And finally, the big one is the need for safety. I need to feel safe. I need to feel safe when I'm with you. So that little child who wants to get into bed with mom and dad, but somebody else has said, you know, they're too old for that, that's inappropriate. What are we doing in that? So these are the things we've got to think about. So children should be seen and not heard. What we're saying there is children should behave the way an adult has decided and not communicate need. We've also had women should be seen and not heard, Anna. We can really extrapolate this out. It's crazy to think things are better here in the UK than they have been. There's still a way to go, but it wasn't that long ago women didn't have the vote. It wasn't that long ago that half of society, men, decided what was appropriate behavior for the other half of society.
And let's remember that prior to that, it was some men, not all men, because the idea of universal suffrage is very recent in history. It was a certain set of men. So I think, you know, what with my therapist hat on, when I'm listening to my clients talk about their experiences as children, I always say to them, no, you weren't bad. That was what was deemed to be, but what you were at that moment was inconvenient. So it's an inconvenient behavior. It's not a bad or inappropriate behavior. It's inconvenient to someone, and therefore it's deemed to be inappropriate or bad. So I think this is the case with dogs. You know, we were out for a walk today and a delightful little cockapoo came along, and he could smell Teddy's lunch in my bag because I often feed him while we're out because we can play games, or, you know, it's a way of not giving him treats and getting him to gain weight. I bring his lunch with him, and, you know, it was pilchard cake. It smelled lovely. It's homemade, and this cockapoo was very, very keen to have some. And his guardian was mortified that he was behaving that way. And what she kept saying was, you know, greedy dog, greedy. No, this is not greedy at all. His nose has picked up a scent, something that's really exciting and potentially quite delicious. He's coming over to me and I think very politely asking whether he could have some. He's doing the natural thing. You know, if a child sees a chocolate cake, what do they want? They want to have that chocolate cake. If we can smell our favorite food cooking, what do we want? We would love to have some of that. So they don't have filters. This little guy didn't have a filter. He just knew what his nose was telling him, and honestly said to me, I'd really like some of that. He wasn't trying to steal it or paw at it, or, which, you know, could also have been understandable. But actually, he was really polite. He just stood up and looked at me and looked at my bag. And I thought, okay, yes, I asked permission to give him some. And then he was happy and off he trotted because he'd had a little taste. So this is what we're talking about, isn't it? That's a very mild, small incident, but it's the kind of incident that happens so often in one day in a dog's life, these little moments where they're behaving in a way that she expected me to be judging her and her dog. And so she was mortified, and consequently, it was an inconvenient behavior to her, not to me, to her, and not to little Oscar, because that was his name. It was just, and I think we really need to begin to think about that. What is it that I'm labeling as inappropriate? Because it's bad enough when we're doing it with children who are the same species as us. This is an entirely different species that we're living with. And how, to what extent is what we're deeming inappropriate part of their species expression?
100%. I think for me, and you've hit on something really important there. I think a lot of people are more bothered by their dog's behavior when they feel embarrassment or shame or the things that they feel. So often those negative judgments we put on others are more about our own emotional state, actually, and what we're looking at there. And also one thing to bear in mind, the judgments we make about behaviors, we have to recognize that as humans, we're designed to judge. Our brain likes to do it. When you think about cognitive appraisals, those quick thinking judgments based on a safe worldview that we've created with our beliefs and our values and all these kind of things. So often, so we shouldn't beat ourselves up about it on that side of things. But I often say with us humans, two things are true. One is we love to judge, and two, we hate to be judged. And that tells you really, because we know that if somebody judges our behavior, they don't know our lived experience, and that's why it's hard, right, to be judged. But we make these quick judgments. But there's something underneath all this that I think is a really healthy way of looking at behavior, and that is everything is feedback. So it's not a case of just not doing training or having boundaries and recognizing that some things are, especially more socially kind of acceptable. It is about recognizing the feedback. Boundaries are important, but they shouldn't be barriers to unmet need. I think that's one thing to think about. So if you've got little Oscar then, and he's legging it over, and he did mug you, and he did just grab the food, right? That's feedback for me. And if it was one of my dogs, we're thinking, right, that's feedback. If I just see the behavior as bad intrinsically, I'm going to want to control and correct it, because it's just what we do instinctively if we already have that narrative. If I see it as feedback, it's like, right, what do I need to do now regarding the adaptations for this dog in the environment? What do I need to do? What age are they at? I'll tell you a little story here, Anna. Arthur, who's now 12, so he's my old boy. Little Arthur, when he was about 8 months, we lived down on the seafront here in Devon, very lovely. He spotted a family with a picnic, and he demolished that picnic. Oh my God, he demolished it really quickly. So unlike Oscar, he was like, I'll have a bit of that, I'll have a bit of that. And unlike most dogs, he'd run along and maybe grab a bun or something. He just, I'll have a bit of this, I'll have a bit of that. So anyway, luckily because we're down the seafront, there's a sandwich shop nearby. It cost me about 20 quid, I think, to replace this picnic. But he was 8 months old. His ability to self-regulate wasn't there yet. So we have to think about all these things. It's feedback. That told me then, oh, I've got to be really careful about how I navigate the world when he's off leash at the moment, because he's going to struggle to kind of do these kind of things. And so this is a healthy way of looking at it. And like you say, with Oscar, he came over. The problems are often in the eye of the beholder. I've been to see clients sometimes, with their dogs for whatever it is. And the dog's doing something else while I'm there, and I'm thinking, God, at the very least, that's really irritating. But the clients that's fine for them. Like you say, it's fine for them, so that's fine. It's not a problem. It's only a problem if we perceive it as it. This is the key. But if we see behavior as feedback, it tells us stuff all the time. And if you have a metric of thinking about working with behavior of everything's an invitation, that's the first thing. And that's a hard thing for people to think about, because many are so stuck in a compliance-based model. Well, the dog must do it because it's a command. But actually, it's a request, really. It's an invitation, because the dog will do it or they won't. We will fool ourselves to think that they will always do it. So if they don't, then that's feedback, right? So it's telling me something. And if we're not open to that feedback, if we're not open to thinking, I wonder why Rover can't do that today, because normally they can, we're going to miss a bit about their need story. And I think dogs specifically, children are a bit more complicated, and they are. Humans, we're just a bit more complicated generally. There's other extra things that we have to think about, even with doggies, you know, this notion of challenging the good, bad continuum. There's a great book, by the way, for anyone's listening, called Discipline, Not Damage, by Dr. Vanessa Lapointe, who's a clinical psychologist who works with children, looking about how you can make sure that you don't miss out on the children's needs based on looking at everything through just good or bad. But we have to have some remnants of kind of cohesion, social decency, rule of law. We have to have some structures in place, especially for us humans, of course. So we have to kind of make sure we can navigate those. But for doggies especially, and especially those dogs I work with, those dogs who are deemed as being dangerous, aggressive, reactive, whatever term people want to use, we definitely can't look at their behaviors through that metric. Most of them are, but it's increasingly more dangerous unless you think, right, even if that dog's bitten, that is feedback, and it is part of that dog's survival story, as far as I'm concerned. It is up to me to learn that story, not just arbitrarily judge and define them by the actions that they give. And even in a human sense, when with my human psychology background, working with ex-offenders, people that, you know, had been punished for their crime, and there's, well, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but you know, society has to be kept safe, etc., etc. But nobody wakes up thinking, I'm going to be a criminal today. I'm going to wake up, I'm going to do this today, I'm going to do that today. And I think that's why trying to redefine working with aggression in dogs, which is what I try and do, can be challenging for some people, Anna. Because when we challenge this stuff, I'm working on a project at the moment called Psycho Dogs and Monsters. And I love that because people call dogs psycho dogs, and they call people who have done certain crimes monsters. Already by that language, who speaks monster? Anybody out there listening speak monster? So if you've already classified a dog as a monster or as a human as a monster, how do you communicate? How do you find out more? How do you try and ensure that we don't see history repeating itself for somebody else? So I think it can be challenging. It's easier to label, isn't it? It's easier to judge.
Well,
it's easier to say bad dog, bad child, bad person than actually to recognize child in need, dog in need, human in need.
it's about balance, isn't it? Because I think that as you were saying, you know, to label somebody psycho or monstrous or monster, what that is expressing is the individual's experience of being at the receiving end of scary behavior or threatening behavior from the other side. So you know, it's perfectly understandable that somebody who has a history of sexual abuse or violent crime, it may well be perceived in that way because that is very scary behavior. And so I wouldn't wish to be judgmental about that perception, because clearly it is not. As a therapist, I would say it's not healthy behavior. and of course, you would also say that it's symptomatic of something, and so would I. But from the public safety perspective, absolutely, this is a threat. And equally, we can understand why somebody walking past a dog who's baring his rather scary teeth, particularly if it's a big dog, or if you have been walking with your dog and seen your dog attacked by another dog, which is all too frequent, sadly, you are not going to feel anything other than horror and fear, because you're traumatized, your dog's traumatized, your dog may not be alive or maybe nearly dead. This is not a nice dog, you know, from that point of view. But of course, from the other side, if you are the person responsible for that dog, then clearly something may be going wrong with your relationship with your dog. And, you know, I saw just recently, and I'm very sensitive about this because Teddy has a real fear of Rottweilers. And we've done some work around it, and it improved for a bit, but it's kind of back, which is, I understand, not infrequent, and that desensitization doesn't always stick. But the point being is, I'm very sensitive to that because I'm aware of his fears. So I want to give him space, so that he doesn't feel threatened, etc. And I got Teddy out of the way to give him space for this other dog, and then ample space for this other dog to go along. The other dog saw Teddy and quite naturally was wanting to turn towards him. And the roughness, the rough handling that dog received, because he wasn't marching at the speed of his I think this man would have seen himself as his owner rather than guardian, definitely, was quite telling. And I just thought, that is a dog that is really powerful. And at what point is that dog, if he is inclined in that direction, going to turn into a dangerous dog? And what part has this rough handling played in it? So you are automatically going to be asking those questions. And so was I. The minute I saw that, I thought, oh goodness, I'm getting Teddy out of the way because of his fear. But this is, it really hurts to watch.
You mentioned you brought up some really good really important and interesting points in there, Anna, because if we build back up to Teddy and the Rottweiler, we just go back a little bit to what you said about why people might label things in those ways. This is why these conversations are so important. As I say, our brains are designed to have those instant judgments. Our brain wants to feel safe. If we perceive somebody, especially for those who are victims of these people, or who are victims of dogs who are bitten, we can't take away from their experience. It's a genuine experience of their own lack of safety. But and that is valid. But as a society, and especially as professionals, we have to move beyond that, recognizing where their own feelings and emotions have come from that traumatic experience. Now, we've got a two-pronged thing that happens here. Going back to the perpetrator, the human or the dog, at some point we have to move beyond that arbitrary label of them being bad, being a monster, whatever, because they are more likely to continue if we can't find a way of supporting that outlook, especially with dogs. Humans are more complicated, but dogs especially, when the dogs I work with who are often classed as dangerous and have bite histories, the dog clearly isn't feeling safe themselves. So that Rottweiler that you were talking about was a dog who was clearly already not feeling great, is now feeling less great. This is the problem. But so now also, if we have that two-pronged approach, this is where we end up with a kind of recycled trauma. Because you have that person who experiences something negative from this person. This person is perceived to be the monster. This person then changes how they perceive the world and feeling less safe. That then changes their behavior. And especially if they're younger, they can go on to be somebody that somebody might perceive as being the perpetrator. I'll tell you, I'm going to share something with you. It's a personal thing. I talk about my stuff. It's not that I'm sharing for the first time. People who've heard me talk before, but I was a victim of sexualized trauma myself as a child with a non-family member. It happened when I was between 7 and 8 over a period of time. That affected my behavior. All school saw was bad behavior. So I got the cane. several times. This is what we used to do in the UK. We don't anymore. So this is that thing, isn't it, about how I changed my behavior. I became not very nice. I became a bit of a bully, actually, because of what had happened to me. I wasn't able, and then somebody just perceived me as that. And so if we're not careful with this, we need somebody in the process. The person who is the victim is not the person that needs to suddenly show grace and forgiveness. That's an individual thing. But even working with people in the kind of penal system are likely to, if we just keep punishing them, if we lock them away forever, then obviously they can't do anything. But if we just keep putting them in prison and bring them out again without addressing their own trauma, their own needs, their own things, it's likely they're going to go again. And this is why we need, but the human stuff's, not what we're talking about today, but I just think about something similar with the dog. How often does that dog have to keep being demonized without taking away from the trauma of that dog that the dog's attacked, from the trauma of that child who's been bitten? But we have to see both sides, but we have to offer an element of compassion for all, especially when we're the external party, really. So little Andy, then, I was a bit of both going around that process. And how could I then trust an adult to tell them about my trauma? And in fact, I didn't until I was in my early 30s, and it took me a breakdown to do it. So this is interesting for me when we think about the notion, especially of punishment, Anna. The discussions that still keep going on with balanced and aversive trainers, we need to stop it. Stop discussing this in the realm of how to do task. We need to start talking in the terms that we're talking and the stuff that you educate about and that I talk about. Because if you move to a care first approach, and if you understand trauma, pain isn't just about physical pain. We have a bias towards thinking about pain and safety as being physical. So when we think about safety in another, our brain is biased towards physical safety because that's what our brain can get feedback from. But for our own brain and the dogs, we are guessing, it's just as if not more focused on emotional safety and social safety. Same with pain, physical pain. It's interesting, we tend to have a bias towards that. Oh yeah, I can see you've broken your leg, that must have been painful. We don't have the same empathy and compassion for emotional pain, for social pain. And we know that actually, especially with the latest work done by Matthew Lieberman out of UCLA, that was kind of looked at initially with Panskep's initial social pain hypothesis back in the day, has been kind of proven now by recognizing that that part of the brain that fires up when we experience social rejection is the same part of the brain, and has similar aspects of the part of the brain for physical pain. So this is important, isn't it? I think when we start moving forwards is just understanding these components for us. And aversive training is the ultimate in task at all costs. It's the ultimate in saying, I don't care how this animal feels. I might care about the dog, but I don't care how he feels. I just need them to stop the behavior because it's bad. So these trainers, especially who advocate things like shock collars, they are being judge, jury, and executioner actually in one. They're not giving any remit for that dog to be able to communicate what it is they're experiencing. So we need, and they're very much in that camp of that dog's bad, that dog's naughty, that dog's vicious, that dog's dangerous, that dog's this. And it really annoys me, and sorry I'm going off on one here, but this constant support of shock collars that somehow they are saving dogs' lives. It's just not right, and it's the opposite. It's not a case that positive training is the answer or either. It's about the dogs who are at that level, they're not being listened to. I work almost exclusively with these kind of dogs, and I've not met one dog yet that wasn't in pain, not one. Physical pain often, or emotional pain or social pain. You cannot have a dog be safer to be around by making them feel less safe. And it's the same with the child, it's the same with the adult. And I think that's why these conversations are important.
It is. And thank you so much for sharing your experience. And It's because it is through sharing our experiences that we foster understanding. So thank you for that. There's so much in what you just said there, but it does boil down to one thing. We need to understand that behavior that is, let's say, rather than inconvenient or inappropriate, it is antisocial. Let's say that. Antisocial being defined as aggressive towards another, be it another dog or be it people. That behavior is on an extreme scale, and it needs to be addressed, but not in a punitive sense, but it needs to be seen as symptomatic of something that is wrong. This is a dog that could be in physical pain. There could be something going on with his back, with his hip. We don't know. Doesn't want to be touched, doesn't want to be approached. There could be any number of reasons for that behavior, but we do need to begin to ask the question, what has happened to make this dog this way? So let's talk about some difficult behaviors, or difficult from the human perspective, like, for instance, guarding. How can we better understand that behavior? Is it, well, clearly it's not something that every dog does. Not every dog does. I think the instinct might be there, but not every dog does it. So let's take that, because that's one of those that people deal with on an everyday basis, where they're generally friendly, and affectionate dog turns into that monster we're talking about the minute it's got a stick or, a piece of chicken bone that you're afraid it's going to swallow. What is happening, and how do we deal with that, Andrew?
So I'll come on to that in a second. I just want to go back to this notion of antisocial just very quickly, because I love that term, but not in the way that we say it. That dog is being, or that child, that teenager, is being anti-social. Their ability to be sociable is not there, and this is really important. There's three elements, I feel, to feeling safe, whether we're talking socially, emotionally, physically. Putting physical pain to one side, a lot of the antisocial bit, if we split that up into processing, engagement, and exit, the ability to process a situation, the ability to have agency over engagement, how you choose to engage, and the ability to exit when you're ready. A lot of trauma, by the way, is based in lack of agency over engagement and exit. When you think about it, that is trauma. A lot of young people, especially through adolescence, when the emotions are big and the modulating part of the brain isn't there yet, struggle with engagement. So guess what? It's easy to be a clown. It's easy to be destructive. So you end up engaging with something else. You just can't deal with the social. How many kids, especially younger kids, are forced into engagement? Your aunt is here, you must come down, you must sit at the table, you must do these things. And then we have a lack of exit. For a lot of dogs, it's the lack of exit. A lot of these sensitive dogs early on, They need more time to process. They want to process more, but engagement comes first. Everybody wants to touch you. Every dog runs over to you. Where's the exits when the dog's being forced to walk at an obedience heel all the time? And they just need to move over this way a little bit and feel a bit of an exit, but they can't. I just thought, so being antisocial, yeah, but we need to think about it. The dog is literally anti being social. That is the key, not the other way around, that somehow they're not fitting a social conformist norm. And how many of us have been damaged by that? And I would ask one question. Yes, we have to have this notion of social decency, social cohesion, this notion of, a lot of parents think, oh, my child's a bit different. And, rather than celebrate the difference, that I must get my child to conform. And I get it, because they just want that safety thing. I know when I came out as gay to my parents, they were both really good about it. But Mum told me many years later, part of the challenge for them was suddenly their safe worldview had been challenged. If I was straight and had met a wife and had kids, that's safe. Now, suddenly it wasn't, and they were worried about me. This is back in the 90s when I came out. So we still had a lot of the anti-gay legislation in the UK and all this kind of stuff. So it's interesting for that. But so there you go. I mentioned that just to throw in. Sorry, I do go off on these things, but I think it's important that we look at stuff. So guarding for me is an interesting one. So first of all, guarding is completely normal. I just think it's really important. We all guard, right? You should see the people sat on the promenade outside our place with their chips, and the seagulls come back and they're kind of shooting them off, waving the sticks, and they're guarding their chips, right? We put a lock on our front door. This is the key. A lot of what guarding is, some guarding is that, and I think we have to see that for what it is. A lot of it is more about the dog's lack of secure attachments. A lot of the time, lack of feeling safe. We have to look at that. Also, some of the usual things that we might do with guarding, which is trading, teaching drop, teaching leave it, teaching give, fail with some dogs. Why? Because it's still about, if there's a part of that brain which for whatever reason becomes paranoid or mistrusting about the approach of the human, that's already been triggered. So I teach a lot of stuff with dogs who are, in inverted commas, guarders, because actually it's very rare I find a dog that it is just about that. There's other things that are happening for that dog. Teach different things that actually don't have anything to do with what the dog's doing, stuff that's away from the dog, to give them more chance at not being triggered into having that part of the brain that suddenly becomes very protective and almost paranoid, actually. And those threat evaluation circuits are already firing up. We see it with certain breeds, of course, and of course spaniels, we always think about spaniels, about how they're just heavily driven to grab stuff and have stuff, and we have to get in early with them so they can be like, oh, I can let it go then, that's okay. So it can lead to a bit of a tendency there. But I see, I've worked with so many dogs, especially rescue dogs, who have come into the house with guarding issues that weren't noticed before, that within 4 to 6 months, the dog doesn't care so much. It's their current emotional state that's an issue. And so there could be so many things that feed into what a guardian might be thinking. I think that's important.
It's so true. It's funny because Teddy's friends tend to be spaniels, retrievers, other cockapoos, and he's got lots of friends, but they tend to be around, those breeds. And you know what? They share toys, and they have no problem with that. I often have Kongs out if any of them are visiting. I always have a Kong for each of them. One leaves the Kong, the other one goes and checks it out, because they all like to know what each other's having. We don't have those issues. But what I feel is that what they all share is a particular style of, I'm going to call it parenting, because they've all had really positive experiences and with their humans. They all feel safe, they all feel secure. As long as nobody's trying to take something out of their mouths, then it's all good. And I look at them together when they're playing, and it's such a gorgeous thing. Or when they're just hanging out together, it's such a gorgeous thing, because there really is no problem. I mean, I seem to have this memory of one of his, we always have a birthday picnic to celebrate his birthday. And so all of his friends are always invited. But and I do have this memory of seeing almost a queue where they wanted to get some water. You know, they were waiting, and I was giving. It's this, that I think is their natural state. They don't want confrontation. They don't want conflict any more than the average person does. But if they feel threatened, and I always used to think with Teddy when he was younger, and typically what he would guard would be things he found. So we call that treasure, because you know, he's happened upon it, and it's this shiny bit of wrapper or whatever it is, and I'm danger to my puppy. He's thinking treasure. I've worked for this. I found it. Well, of course, he's not going to want to take it. He's curious about it. I see their guarding behavior as natural as putting a burglar alarm on our home. And I can tell that if somebody tried to break into my house while I was here, I might become fierce myself.
Sure. That's interesting, especially when you talk. So I call that opportunist guarding. It's like the things that you come across. So when it's more specific, it can we have a better idea. So dog gets a bit tense around the food bowl or whatever. A lot of it is opportunist guarding, and actually we can feed into that very easily. We create the value. You know, the dog happens to pinch your socks. We create the value to that if we're running and chasing the dog after the socks. You know, because that doesn't. But also, guarding and something like picker, for example, you know, which is you know, picking up tissues and eating things on the floor. There's a direct correlation for me to stress levels, elevation levels, and the likelihood of doing it. So a lot of the dogs that I've worked with who seem to guard things, and people are worried because the dog might guard something on the walk. The problem isn't the guarding, it's the problem the dog isn't coping on the walk. Once we address that, when we address their generalized anxiety or the fact that they're triggered by things, they don't guard stuff. And I want to invite everybody to think about how important mood state is to how you cope with things more generally. When you're more regulated, when you're more relaxed, you're more likely to share. When you feel confident with the person you're with and you feel safe with them, you're more likely to share. When you're not feeling so good, when you're less regulated, when you're not feeling so safe, you're less likely to share. I think it's something to bear in mind. So it's not always about the fact that the dog's like, it's got that Gollum effect of, oh, it's mine, I'm going to have it. There could be all sorts of things that go on, and we have to just look at it all. That's why, as I say, everything is feedback. I like to look at every case with a fresh pair of eyes and just think, okay, so you've called me in because your dog's got this guarding issue. Let's step back and look at everything else. Let's just see about how this relates to how this dog generally functions. We had a spaniel, guess what, spaniel, come to us, Bertie, bless him, came to us 11 years old. His mother had died, human mom. He'd been with the body for nearly a day before somebody found them. So it was a lot of trauma for him. He'd gone from being the only dog with a woman to living with two men and three other dogs. Two of the dogs, sorry, because we didn't have my living. And I talk about not being bitten. I got bitten by him quite a bit because I didn't know anything about him. And this is the point. And so everything's feedback, right? So I thought, yeah, so we got some problems here. And lo and behold, was he a guarder? Everything. That first 3 months, everything was just a problem. But we worked on a couple of things, but everything fizzled out when he became safe. You know, he didn't. It just stopped. It was interesting for me. So I think we always have to look at these things. And the beautiful thing about these conversations we're having now, looking at things through a wider lens, is it brings us back to a really simple answer to everything, which is it depends. It used to be guarding, you follow this. Separation, you follow this. Reactivity, you do this. And you know what? 7 or 8 out of 10 dogs, that would seem to work. But there'd always be that 2 or 3 it didn't. And these conversations are trying to find the truth for those 2 or 3. Because it isn't just a cookie cutter approach. We've got to think more widely.
That's right. And, you know, I think one of the reasons why Teddy generally is very relaxed about sharing is because he's respected. If I think he is going to be, he's going to be 8 in August, and I have had one incident of guarding in that time, which was worrying, and it was in his first year. And the reason it was worrying is because it involved another dog, not one of his friends, but he had discovered, you know, the Kong balls that I think he enjoyed having it in his mouth. And I at the time didn't know that actually they're not so good for them because of their teeth, because they're of that rough texture. But he really liked it, and he was carrying it on his walk. And I had no idea that he was going to get possessive about this, because I'd never seen him be possessive about anything. Another dog approached him, and it was a dog that was bigger than him. It was a Samoyed. And he hadn't yet started showing signs of disliking dogs that were bigger than him. So I think this episode may well have contributed to it, because ever since then, he doesn't like Samoyeds either. It's but he looked at this dog and he growled, and the dog did not take any notice of his growls, kept approaching. So Teddy became absolutely fierce towards this dog, and I was trying to stand between him and the dog and saying to the person, "Call your dog back, please." And of course, and you know, most people in my experience, if I ask them to do that, they do. This woman just blanked me. She didn't even look at me. And I managed, I don't know how, I think I ended up picking Teddy up because it was the only thing I could do. So, and turned my back on this dog and calmly took Teddy away. But would he then release that ball? Not for love nor money. I could not approach him. Thankfully, there was nobody around, but I knew now that he was in a heightened state, and there was no way that if another dog approached him, that I wasn't going to have, you know, a nasty, potentially nasty incident. So I had to get that ball off him. How did I do it? Well, I started throwing treats. Nope, nothing. So I just waited for him to calm down a little bit. And then I just, from a distance, threw a treat, and he started to take it and grab the ball again. And I, fine, just leave it. Did it a few times, approached, he was getting a little bit closer, you know, he was calming down, allowing me to get a little bit closer. When eventually he gave me the ball, I gave it straight back to him. And we did that several times. And then we continued to walk, because all of this was done in situ, in one place. Thankfully, there was nobody. It was a quiet day in the woods. So we then started walking. I'd give him the ball. He'd have it for a little bit. I'd give him a treat in return. And so the whole thing worked like that. And I thought, well, that got us out of danger. But then I started to create another game. I created a game for when we were out. Different ball, but it was a very simple game where he'd have the ball and I'd hide a treat. I'd tell him to go find the treat. He'd forget all about the ball. I'd grab the ball. And that's how then the ball ceased to be the main thing. And I have to tell you, this is not a dog that likes to play ball games. He just likes to carry it. It's not like I hardly ever throw anything for him because he thinks it's boring. He's not one of these dogs that really loves ball games. He loves scent games. That's his thing. But he loves the feel of the ball in his mouth. And so that, I learned a lot through that incident, I can tell you.
Well, that's a really good example of what I was saying a minute ago, really, that when we make it about the thing, it's hard for the dog to let go. And a lot of the time, This isn't the case for you and Teddy, but other people who they might throw that bit of food and the dog might go and get the food, but then the owner's gone to grab the thing and the dog's gone back again. And now you've poisoned that again because the dog's like, so they get more and more suspicious. And that's why what you were talking about there about what you found work was making things not about the ball, about something else. And that's the methods that I like to add in. Teaching leave it, teaching trade, teaching drop, all that kind of stuff is cool. Add it to your toolkit. The two things that I like to add in are FOMO training, as I call it, fear of missing out, FOMO training. And it works a lot for opportunist guarders. So one of the things I've noticed is a correlation. Opportunist guarders also have to be in the center of everything that's going on. So if you're doing something, they've got to be there, right? They want to be involved all the time. So we can use that. So if the dog's got my socks now, the last thing I want to do is make it about the socks. I'm going to go to their toy box. I'm going to get something out of it. I'm going to be like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm not even going to look at them. I'm going to play with it. I'm going to really get that brain thing. Hang on a minute. I've got to have that. I must have that you have. Do you know what? 9 times out of 10, they've left the bloody monkey socks behind. They've come and got their thing, right? I don't even have to do trade. I don't do anything else. So FOMO training can be really helpful at these times, actually. And you can even add something in that by what you're talking about there on the walks. It's the magic sausage tree stuff, isn't it? It's like, oh my God, look at this over here. When the dog comes over, they find sausage everywhere. It's amazing. That's another FOMO thing. So if the dog's got their thing and they've run off with it, let them have it. Because as soon as you want it, they're going to just really hold on to it. But if you're like, oh my God, and you're doing things over here, they're going to come over at some point because they're going to check it out. And the other thing is the counting game.
I'll tell you something. With Teddy, we haven't got an issue with laundry. And the reason is I sensed from the beginning that that was a road to nowhere, trying to take it from him. And I just allowed him to play with the laundry. And, you know, when I was sorting out laundry, that's when he would grab things and I just would let him play with it for a bit. And then I'd say, tidy up time. And I'd gather up the laundry that I wanted, you know, to put into the washing machine, the rest into the basket. And he very quickly started to help me put things back in the basket. And now he actually loads the washing machine. So this is how it happened. And it's just made me smile, you talking about that, because I recognize that very much. He does like to be at the center of things. He likes to be involved in everything, you know.
Yeah, I like stuff too. And a lot of them are the ones who are a bit more sensitive and you know, the ones who tend to join you in the bathroom because they've got to be wherever you are, whatever's going on. You know, Molly's a bit like this. So at Christmas, we buy them gifts and it doesn't matter what the 2 boys have. It doesn't matter what she's got to have what the boys have. That's it. And in fact, that's what has the value for her now. Her own thing doesn't have no value anymore. She has to have whatever Arthur or Harley has. So we can use that. This is the thing about learning. The thing about a care approach, as opposed to a task approach, is the only difference, but it's a fundamental one, is learning from the other first. So I still need to get the task done at some point because I don't want the dog doing whatever. But if I learn from the dog first, that's the whole point of a care-based, relational-based approach. Learn from the first, be humble enough to think, okay, this is annoying me, this is upsetting me, this is whatever. But let's just think about what's happening here and how can I navigate it. So yeah, FOMO training is a good one. The counting game, a version of it, which is Chirag Patel's counting game, is another good one. I do a version of it for dogs with guarding, which is just, if I'm going to use food, because I know the dog wants the food, I'm just going to start putting the food on the floor right over there. So if the dog's here with the thing, I'm going to start doing it over there. And I'm just going to go 1, 2, and I'm just going to count. This is a little bit different to Sherry's version, but then when I get to 5, I'm going to pick them all up. And I want the dog's brain, a number of times the dog's got something, they're like, yeah, getting ready to guard it because you're going to come over. They're like, oh, they've still got it in the mouth. They're like, what are you doing? Hang on, food's going on the floor. Food's coming off the floor. Food's going on the floor. Food's going off the floor. And it's getting that brain to think, I want to be part of that. And the good thing is when the dog does come over, at some point they're going to have to drop the thing to start eating the food. But I'm not going to try and grab the thing. I'm just going to keep walking. And then I'll leave the room, can shut the door behind me. And also that's a great one for when you're out on the walk. dog's doing something over there, I can be like 1, and then guess what? The dog's over because they want to get over there and start having it, and then I just keep counting, keep putting it down. So these are extra things we can think about, I think, for dogs who might guard. But we really need to think about whether it is, this is the thing about moving away from the labels of inappropriate or appropriate. It might not be that the dog is guarding necessarily. It could be all sorts of reasons why that in that moment that dog's tense. The worst thing we can do is challenge them. You know, I had a client who we'd done the FOMO training work with her spaniel. Actually, it was a cockapoo. Thinking about it, it's a cockapoo. Normally, when somebody phones me with a cockapoo, it's either separation related, guarding related, or handling. That's what I tend to find. But now we know more about the lived experience for cockapoos and how a lot of it is because of their myofascial sensitivities. That's why grooming is difficult for them. Harnesses are difficult for them. This is the thing. It's not bad dog. It's like, I'm struggling here. So her husband was changing a light bulb in a lamp in their lounge, and it was one of the little candle light ones. So he took the light bulb out, put it on the floor, went to put the new light bulb in. Of course, the dogs grabbed the light bulb. Now, I totally get, now in the past, they would have, oh my God, this is dangerous. Forget about training. I must get it back. If you'd have done that, the dog would have gone, clump. They just would, because they're going to hold on to it, aren't they? They're going to crush it. The woman held her nerve and just did the FOMO training with the dog with this light bulb in its mouth. And the dog came and just left the light bulb and followed mum to do the FOMO stuff. So I hear when people say, oh yeah, but in an emergency, we must. And I would say, you know, do what you want to do what you got to do, but be mindful about what you're actually potentially going to do, because these dogs who have people keep trying to take things off them, they just learn to run quicker and eat quicker because their brain's just predicting you're going to come and challenge them for it. And definitely, and you know, I'm hoping, you know, I know your viewers are very informed, but this is why the dominant stuff that we see on telly, especially around guarding, is really dangerous. And in fact, dear Mr. Milan, with a, well, we can name him. His worst bite was with that poor Labrador who was trying to tell him, I don't feel comfortable with you around my food. But he had to challenge him, and the dog bit him. And for anybody who might still see any credibility in that gentleman, he then said to camera, I didn't see that coming. I use that video for my dog body language things for the general public, because by the time I show that video, everybody in that room saw it coming. And he's supposed to be the professional in the room. But to be fair to him, Mr. Milan, he's stuck in task. That's the problem. If you're stuck in appropriate, inappropriate, good, bad, then you're more likely to get bitten. You're more likely to have a child who'll run away. You're more likely to have a partner who will have a breakdown. You just will. You know, I remember working with a lady who had a fear of buttons years ago. And it was only when she left her husband was she able to get help. And the reason for that is I'm not sure, I can't remember whether she left her husband because of this, but while she was with her husband, all she ever heard from him was, don't be silly. Yeah, how ridiculous. You know, you're embarrassing me. Because she'd only have to see somebody undo their top button in a restaurant and she'd have a panic. So this is the problem. So he decided that her behavior was somehow wrong, bad, inappropriate. That's the point, without recognizing that for her, that behavior was communicative of a real need. And what was interesting there, just to finish the story, I helped with the general stuff. I had a colleague who did some kind of regression work with her and under hypnosis and that. But she had clear memories of as a child, very young child, coming into the lounge and seeing her mother with her favorite toy, sewing a button on. And all that young brain saw was needle, pain. Yeah, and it sticks. I had the wonderful Jennifer Shyrock come in my dog center care recently. And she was talking about when she was a baby, they tried to put corrective lenses in her. And then when she was 11 or 12, she had to go to the opticians to have normal lenses, and she had a panic attack. And it was only because her mother said, well, that's probably connected to that. You know, we underestimate, well, we're learning so much more about even babies. They might not have the cognitive function to piece stuff together, but that's not what they need. Their nervous system is completely aware of the environment. That's why, you know, all these things, even at a young age, they can be traumatized by
Well,
things that
it's
go on.
especially at a young age, because they the cognitive ability to process what's happening.
Yes, yes,
They,
yes.
they do not have the ability to understand what is happening, and therefore it is going to be more traumatic, which is going to be very similar for dogs.
Yeah,
If
100%.
understand that the grooming experience is necessary for them, and that no harm is going to, how intrusive. And you about cockapoos being very sensitive to grooming. Oh boy, have I been on a journey with mine over grooming. So I think, Andrew, this is the stuff that we all need to be thinking about. It's developing our own sensitivity through understanding and awareness that these beautiful companions that we live with are always, as you put it, giving us feedback. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. And now, if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
So I've got my dog-centered care group online, so that's the place to go. Really, go to dog-centered care. Always happy for people to kind of message me, and then all of the conversations I have are up on the Dog Centre Care YouTube channel. Do you know there's about 65 now, I think. I know, I can't believe it, really. Soon builds up over time, and I've tried to curate it in such a way that, you know, some of the guests aren't dog experts, they are trauma experts, they're child educational psychologists, they're, you know, whatever, because there's a richness there to us understanding things. Because for me, there's only two things we need to remember. This is a good way to finish, I think, is one is to be humble enough to keep growing and learning. Maybe we don't know the full story of our loved one, our dog. Maybe we don't know our own, actually. That's a good thing to think about. A lot of the negative thoughts we have is because of what other people have told us who we are, of course. You know, we have to think that somebody else's judgment of us being bad or naughty or whatever it is. And the second thing is to give ourselves grace to get it wrong. We get it wrong all the time, and that's fine. We grow through that. Being available to the truth of another is hard sometimes, especially if we're not even available to our own. And that's something to bear in mind. So we're just growing, and there's no rights or wrongs. There is just feedback, and it depends what we do with it.
It certainly does depend on what we do with it. Thank you once again, Andrew. I will be putting a link to your YouTube channel and your Facebook page in the description box. And thank you all for watching. Next time, we're going to be looking at gut health in our dogs. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.